On April 19, 2008, a 19-year-old girl was admitted to the Most Virtel Amstetten Hospital. She was unconscious, her breathing was shallow, and she was suffering from severe convulsions. The man who brought her in identified himself as her grandfather, Josef Fritzl. He identified the patient as Kirsten Fritzl. Doctors in the intensive care unit immediately faced a series of confounding problems. Kirsten was in a state of critical multi-organ failure, yet there was no apparent cause. More perplexing, she had no medical records. In a country with a comprehensive national healthcare system, it was as if she had never existed. Her physical condition told a story of profound and prolonged neglect. Her teeth were severely decayed, and her body showed signs of malnourishment. The grandfather, Josef Fritzl, offered a vague and inconsistent explanation. He claimed that Kirsten's mother, Elizabeth, had dropped the girl off at the family home, leaving a note before disappearing again. He said Elizabeth belonged to a secretive religious sect and had abandoned her family years ago. But the story did not align with the medical evidence. To save Kirsten's life, doctors needed a detailed family medical history. They needed to speak with her mother. With no other options, the hospital staff and local police made a public appeal. Broadcast on television and printed in newspapers, they called for Elizabeth Fritzl, a woman who had been registered as a missing person for nearly a quarter century, to come forward. The appeal created a paradox. A young woman had materialized from nowhere, her life hanging by a thread. Her mother, who had vanished in 1984, was the only person who could provide the information to save her daughter. But for 24 years, Elizabeth Fritzl had been a ghost, a name in a cold case file. The question that hung in the air was not just where she was, but why, after more than 2 decades of silence, she would remain hidden when her own daughter's life was at stake. To the residents of Amstetten, Josef Fritzl was an unremarkable figure. Born on April 9, 1935, he was a retired electrical engineer, a landlord who managed the property at Yibstrasse 40, and a family man. He and his wife, Rosemarie, had raised 7 children of their own. By all outward appearances, he was a stern but respectable patriarch, a fixture in the community. But the ordinary facade of Josef Fritzl's life was a meticulous construction designed to conceal a second reality he had been engineering for decades, both in his mind and in the earth beneath his home. The roots of this deception, according to forensic psychiatrist Dr. Adelheid Kastner, who conducted extensive interviews with Fritzl after his arrest, were planted in a childhood devoid of affection and defined by fear. Fritzl grew up as an only child raised solely by his mother, Maria. His father had deserted the family when he was 4. He described his mother as a harsh, abusive woman who beat him regularly and left him feeling unwanted. He was, in his own words, an alibi child, conceived only to prove his mother's fertility to her partner. He told Dr. Kastner that during the Second World War, his mother would send him alone into the local air raid shelter during bombing raids while she remained in the house. This instilled in him an overwhelming anxiety, a constant fear of abandonment. To cope with this loveless and terrifying upbringing, he developed a psychological strategy. He learned to compartmentalize his emotions, to push his fear and rage into a metaphorical dungeon. He called it the cellar of his soul. It was from this internal prison that an overwhelming compulsion grew, a need to exert absolute power to dominate, control, and possess another human being completely. The physical manifestation of Fritzl's psychology began to take shape as early as 1978. At the time, his daughter, Elizabeth, was just 12 years old. He applied for and received official planning permission to expand the existing cellar of his apartment building. He framed the project as the construction of a private nuclear fallout shelter. Over several years, neighbors watched as Fritzl, a qualified engineer, excavated tons of earth from beneath his garden. He built a warren of windowless concrete rooms. The entrance was a masterpiece of concealment. To reach the prison, one had to pass through a total of 8 doors. The final door was a 300-kilogram steel-reinforced concrete slab mounted on rollers and completely hidden behind a set of shelves in his workshop. It was secured with a complex electronic lock, operatable only by a remote keypad to which he alone knew the code. This meticulous planning was not the beginning of Fritzl's violent impulses, but a refinement of them. In 1967, while working in the city of Linz, he broke into a woman's apartment and raped her at knife point. He was arrested, convicted, and served 12 months of an 18-month prison sentence. This conviction, however, would become a crucial missing piece of the puzzle for future authorities. Under Austrian law at the time, his criminal record was expunged after 15 years. The system, designed to allow for rehabilitation, effectively erased his past. When social service agencies later investigated the Fritzl household, they would find no record of his violent sexual offending. This legal mechanism, functioning exactly as intended, created a critical blind spot. It allowed a convicted rapist to appear on paper as a suitable guardian, a man with a clean record who could be trusted with the care of children. By the early 1980s, Fritzl's psychological need and his physical creation were nearing alignment. All that was missing was the subject of his obsession. He chose his 4th child, Elizabeth. Unlike her siblings, Elizabeth was rebellious. She had a strong will and had attempted to run away from her domineering father on multiple occasions, once making it as far as Vienna before being brought back by police. According to Dr. Kastner's psychiatric analysis, this resistance was precisely what made her the target. For a man driven by a pathological need for control, breaking a compliance spirit offered little satisfaction. The true prize was to conquer and possess someone strong and defiant. In Fritzl's distorted worldview, Elizabeth's struggle for freedom was the very thing that sealed her fate. On a hot day in late August 1984, Josef Fritzl asked his 18-year-old daughter, Elizabeth, for help. He needed assistance hanging a heavy new door in the cellar he had been working on for years. She followed him down the stairs into the dusty, subterranean space. It was a cruel, final act of manipulation. The door Elizabeth helped set in its frame was the last of 8, the one that would seal her prison. As she turned to leave, her father pressed a cloth soaked in ether to her face. Her world went dark. The lie solidifies. The day after the abduction, Josef and Rosemarie Fritzl reported their daughter missing. A month later, a letter arrived, handwritten by Elizabeth. It stated that she was tired of living with her family and had run away with a friend, warning them not to look for her or she would leave the country. Fritzl had forced her to write it. The story was plausible. Elizabeth's previous attempts to run away were well known to her family and the local police. Fritzl told everyone she had joined a religious cult, a convenient, unverifiable explanation that required no further questions. The lie was accepted by his wife, his family, and the authorities. It would serve as the foundation for the two separate worlds he would maintain for the next 24 years. Elizabeth's new reality was a 55-square-meter concrete tomb, a space with no natural light and poor ventilation. For the first 9 years of her captivity, the space was even smaller, just 35 square meters. Her father was her sole connection to the outside world. He visited her almost every day, bringing food and supplies. And he began raping her immediately. Over the 24 years, it is estimated he raped her over 3,000 times. He controlled every aspect of her existence. As punishment for perceived disobedience, he would switch off the lights and electricity for days at a time, plunging the cellar into total darkness and silence. He told Elizabeth and the children they would later have that the cellar doors were rigged with explosives or would release poison gas if they ever tried to escape. A lie, but a powerful tool of psychological control. In this inhuman environment, Elizabeth fought to preserve her own humanity and to create a life for the children she was forced to bear. Alone, without any medical assistance, she gave birth to 7 children in the cellar. Kirsten was born around 1989, followed by Stefan a year later. Lisa was born in 1992 and Monica in 1994. In 1996, she gave birth to twins, Alexander and a brother, Michael. Her youngest, Felix, was born in 2002. She did her best to be a mother. With no books, she taught the children what she could remember of reading and writing. She used the television Fritzl provided to show them a glimpse of the outside world, and she made up stories of princesses and pirates to fill the silence. In a poignant attempt to normalize the abnormal, she decorated the drab concrete walls with children's drawings and pictures. In 1996, this fragile existence was shattered. One of the newborn twins, Michael, developed severe respiratory problems shortly after birth. Elizabeth pleaded with her father to get medical help, but he refused. After 66 hours, the infant died. Fritzl took the small body from the cellar and incinerated it in the building's furnace, erasing all physical evidence of the child's life and death. With the birth of more children, Fritzl's perverse creation evolved. He began an audacious new phase of his deception, one that cemented his role as the absolute controller of 2 separate realities. He decided to divide the family. In May 1993, he took 9-month-old Lisa from Elizabeth and left her on the doorstep at the apartment upstairs. He included another letter, again supposedly from Elizabeth, claiming she could not care for the child and asking her parents to look after her. He repeated the process in December 1994 with baby Monica, and again in 1997 with the surviving twin, Alexander. Josef and Rosemarie Fritzl went through the official channels, becoming the foster parents and later the legal guardians of their own grandchildren. This created a schism that is almost impossible to comprehend. 3 children, Lisa, Monica, and Alexander, lived upstairs. They went to school, had friends, took music lessons, and played in the garden swimming pool, all under the care of their grandmother and the man they knew as their grandfather. They believed their mother had abandoned them. Meanwhile, just meters below their feet, their mother and their 3 other siblings, Kirsten, Stefan, and Felix, lived in perpetual darkness, their existence a closely guarded secret. They had never seen the sun. They had never felt rain. Their only knowledge of the world came from a television screen and their mother's stories. The question of how Rosemarie Fritzl could have remained ignorant for so long has been a central point of public debate. However, investigators have consistently stated they believe she was unaware of the cellar's true purpose. Relatives described Josef as an absolute tyrant in the home. His word was law, and he tolerated no dissent. He had strictly forbidden anyone, including his wife, from entering his workshop or the cellar, which he claimed was for his engineering work and storage. Rosemarie was not merely a passive observer. She was the victim of a 24-year campaign of manipulation. She was led to believe her daughter had run away, a belief cruelly reinforced each time a foundling grandchild appeared on her doorstep, with a desperate handwritten plea from the daughter she missed. She was gaslit into becoming the unknowing caretaker of one half of her husband's monstrous secret. For 24 years, the foundation of Josef Fritzl's secret world had held firm. But in April of 2008, a crack appeared. It began with Kirsten, the eldest of the Seller children, falling gravely ill. Elizabeth, desperate, pleaded with her father to get medical help for her 19-year-old daughter. For reasons of his own, he agreed. This single act, a deviation from the cold logic that had led him to let his infant son Michael die years earlier, would trigger the total collapse of his empire. After taking the unconscious Kirsten to the hospital on April 19, Fritzl was confronted with the doctor's public appeal for her mother to come forward. He was losing control of the narrative. In the final week of April, with pressure mounting, he made his final, fatal miscalculation. He brought Elizabeth, now 42, along with her sons Stefan, 18, and Felix, 5, up from the cellar. He presented them to his wife Rosemarie, spinning a tale that their long-lost daughter had finally decided to return home from the cult, bringing her other children with her. He likely believed he could manage the situation, that he could coach Elizabeth and invent a plausible story for the authorities, just as he had done for 24 years. It was the ultimate act of hubris from a man who believed he could control every variable. But he had underestimated the profound trauma etched onto his daughter and the scrutiny of the outside world. On April 26th, Josef Fritzl took Elizabeth to the hospital to visit Kirsten. By now, hospital staff were deeply suspicious. An anonymous tip was made to the police, who were waiting for them at the hospital. Elizabeth and her father were intercepted and taken to the police station for questioning. At first, Elizabeth was silent. The psychological prison her father had built was, in many ways, stronger than the physical one. For 24 years, he had been her sole authority, the arbiter of her reality. The ingrained terror of him was absolute. The investigators recognized they were not dealing with a typical witness. They made her a promise. If she told them the truth, they would guarantee that she would never have to see her father again. This was the key. It was the first time in 24 years that an external power offered her protection from her tormentor. The promise of permanent safety was enough to break the silence. Her first words to the police chief were, "No one will ever believe me." Then, for the next several hours, she recounted the entire story. 24 years of darkness, of trappee, of childbirth and isolation, of a life lived in a concrete box beneath her family home. Based on Elizabeth's harrowing testimony, Josef Fritzl was formally arrested. He confessed to the core facts of the imprisonment and to fathering the children. He provided the police with the numerical code to the final hidden door to the cellar. As the door swung open, light from the outside world flooded the entrance to the prison for the first time in 24 years, exposing the full, horrific truth of what had happened at Evilest 40. The trial of Josef Fritzl began on March 16, 2009. The case had drawn global media attention, and hundreds of journalists descended on the small city of St. Pölten. As he entered the courtroom for the first time, Fritzl hid his face from the cameras behind a large blue office binder, a gesture that would become one of the defining images of the trial. Fritzl was charged with a slate of crimes: murder by negligence for the death of the infant Michael, enslavement, rape, false imprisonment, coercion, and incest. In his initial plea, he admitted guilt on some of the charges. He pleaded guilty to incest, false imprisonment, and coercion. He also pleaded partially guilty to rape. However, he denied the two most serious charges, enslavement and the murder of his infant son. It was a continuation of his lifelong attempt to control the narrative, to minimize his own culpability even in the face of overwhelming evidence. The centerpiece of the prosecution's case was the testimony of the main victim and witness, Elizabeth. To spare her the trauma of testifying in person, her evidence had been pre-recorded over 11 hours of interviews. On the second day of the trial, the courtroom was cleared of all press and spectators. For the first time, Josef Fritzl was forced to sit and watch, unable to interrupt or control the story, as his daughter recounted in her own words the full extent of her 24-year ordeal. She described the repeated rapes, often committed in front of her children. She detailed the births, the darkness, the cold, and the death of her son Michael, who she held as he struggled to breathe for 66 hours while her father refused to help. The testimony was reportedly devastating. Fritzl's lawyer later stated that his client was crushed by what he saw and heard. The man who entered the courtroom the following day was visibly changed. The blue binder was gone. He was described as a broken man, his shoulders stooped, his hands shaking. The psychological defenses he had built over a lifetime had been shattered by the direct, undeniable truth of his victim's voice. The 11 hours of video forced him into a direct confrontation with the consequences of his actions from the perspective of the person who suffered them. He addressed the judge, his voice strained. He said that it was only after seeing the testimony that he realized for the first time how cruel I was to Elizabeth. He then changed his plea. He declared himself guilty on all charges, including enslavement and the murder by negligence of the infant Michael. When asked by the judge why he had not sought medical help for the dying baby, he whispered, "I don't know why I didn't help. I thought the little one would survive. I should have recognized that the baby was doing poorly." On March 19, 2009, after a trial that lasted just 4 days, the jury delivered its verdict. Josef Fritzl was found guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to life imprisonment and ordered to be confined in a secure psychiatric institution. When asked if he accepted the verdict, he stated simply, "I accept it." For Josef Fritzl, the verdict marked the end of his story. He was transferred to Garsten Abbey, a former monastery converted into a high-security prison, to begin his life sentence. But for his victims, the sentence is lifelong. Elizabeth and her 6 surviving children were given new identities and relocated to a small, undisclosed village in northern Austria, protected from the intense media spotlight. They began the monumental task of building a new life and healing from an unimaginable trauma. The challenges were immense. The downstairs children, Kirsten, Stefan, and Felix, had to adjust to a world of overwhelming sensory input. Sunlight, open spaces, the feeling of grass, and the presence of other people were all alien concepts. Stefan, who, at 173 centimeters tall, had been forced to stoop in the 168-centimeter-high cellar, had to learn to walk upright. Simple things like the dimming of lights or the closing of a door could trigger panic attacks. The upstairs children, Lisa, Monica, and Alexander, faced their own profound trauma. They had to reconcile the image of the loving grandfather who raised them with the reality of the monster who had imprisoned their mother and siblings. The house at Weibstrasse 40 became a global symbol of hidden evil, a site of dark fascination. To prevent it from becoming a morbid tourist attraction and to provide a sense of finality, authorities took a decisive step. In June 2013, the cellar, the entire subterranean prison, was filled to the ceiling with concrete. The tomb was permanently sealed. The house was later sold and renovated, an attempt by the town of Amstetten to move on from its darkest chapter. In the years since his conviction, Josef Fritzl has remained in a secure unit for mentally ill offenders. In recent years, his story has re-entered the public discourse. Now approaching 90 and suffering from advanced dementia, his lawyers began arguing that he is no longer a danger to society. In January 2024, a lower court approved the transfer, the decision that was overturned by a higher court in March. In May 2024, the lower court again ruled he could be moved, a decision that remains subject to appeal. This legal ambiguity presents a final, unsettling question. While his victims must live forever with the full and vivid memory of his crimes, the perpetrator's own mind is fading, his memories dissolving into the fog of dementia. It highlights a profound asymmetry between crime and consequence, between the indelible trauma of the victim and the decaying consciousness of the abuser. The story of the house on Weibstrasse 40 is not a simple tale of a monster. It is a story of meticulous planning, of psychological manipulation, and of systemic blind spots. It is a story of how an ordinary man, in an ordinary town, built a private hell and concealed it from the world for 24 years. And it serves as a chilling reminder of the secrets that can lie dormant just beneath the surface of everyday life, waiting for a single crack in the foundation to bring them into the light.